Hello Year 10, this is week 2 of rivers and this is the lesson 2 of week 2, looking in more detail at the long and across profile of a river. The aim of the lesson is to be able to draw a long profile of a river, of an actual river on graph paper and annotate it, to be able to draw what a typical cross-section might look at each of the 3 stages of a river's long profile, and to be able to describe some of the characteristics of a river's long profile as you go from source to sea. Okay. Oops. There we go. So, firstly, if you plotted a journey down a river, it might look something like this from sideways on, and the sideways on profile of a river is called the long profile, the sideways on profile from its source all the way down to the sea. Many rivers follow a similar long profile shape, and certain characteristics of the landscape and river are the same as it goes downstream. You'll notice here I've called this, you can think of this as axes on a graph if you like, so you've got the y-axis and the x-axis, and this line here is the shape of the land of the river as it changes, or the river valley as it changes downstream, and it's a concave shape, and all rivers from source to sea want to have this smooth concave shape because they want to get down to the sea as quickly as possible, and that requires them to vertically erode downwards in the upper course, and then in the lower course, and that a lot of that gravitational potential energy is gone, the river will start to erode outwards or laterally. And so they have this concave shape. So if you were to be asked to describe the long profile of a river, or the shape of a long profile of a river, you describe it as a concave shape. It's this kind of, I suppose, inwards curve. Of course, not all rivers follow that exact lovely concave shape because of different rock types and different characteristics of the river, or different local factors. Obviously, it's not going to be a nice smooth concave shape. It's going to be a bit more jumpy and jaggedy, but in general, it will still follow that shape. So we've got the source high in the upland areas, you can see from the pictures here, upland part, and we've got the wider river in the much flatter areas as we come down towards the mouth. To describe the changes in the river channel, if we're describing changes in the river channel, we're talking about this actual bit of blue here, the actual area the river flows through. It's the channel, the bit the water is actually in. Or we might be asked to describe changes in the river valley, which is the land through which it flows. So first of all, let's look at the valley then. So the river valley changes. It goes from a steep gradient, so a very steep gradient, to a much shallower gradient. It goes from a V-shaped, narrower valley to a much wider, flatter valley at the bottom. The river channel goes from very narrow to very wide, or to wider. Let's now have a look at the cross profile of a river. So a river's cross profile will also change downstream, and it generally becomes flatter and wider as the river is eroding more laterally, as we go further down. A cross profile is basically, if I were to try and get a knife and I was able to cut through a river from one side of the bank to the other side of the bank, that would be a cross profile. So I literally, with a knife or an axe or something, I'm chopping the river in two from one bank to the other bank, and then I'm looking at it head on. So over here we've got the river cross profile, which is of a V-shaped valley. So this river cross profile is in the upper course of a river, and we can see that because the side of the valley is really steep. It looks like a letter V, as you can see here, and the river itself, the river channel itself, is very small. This one here is going to be the cross profile of a river in the lower course because it's very, very flat, the valley, and very, very wide. Okay, this is how you might expect the cross profile to change downstream. I've just got 3 pictures here of a typical cross section of a river in the upper course for A, in the middle course for B, and the lower course for C. So you can see some of the changes here. In the upper course, you generally have steep-sided valleys and a very narrow, shallow river. So that is a cross section cut across the river in the upper course. Then we've got B. This is a cross section cut across the river in the middle course. And what you can see is you've still got some steep sides, but they're nowhere near as steep as the start there. You have a floodplain, which is this flat area of land on either side of the river that it will flood into. And at the bottom here, you can see the gradient of the valley sides is even lower or even less. We've got another flat area, but we've also got is these things called levees, which you might draw on. So levees, when the river floods, and as it's losing energy, it will deposit material on the side of the riverbanks. And that deposited material can form like an embankment, I suppose, a natural embankment. And that's called a levee. So that's what you see in the lower course. And again, it says it's very wide and flat. The river is wide, deep, with a large sediment load. It'd be worth just maybe pausing here and having a read of those three areas. It would certainly help with your homework this week. Okay, so this is what you are going to do today. You are going to draw for me a long profile of a river. And I've been nice and I've drawn the axis on for you. So I've got a river here, which I made up. And we've got the source is 447 meters in height above sea level. And then I've got just different points along the river, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5, all the way to point, and I've got 9 points there. I'll just move this webcam so I can see it a bit more clearly. And then I've also got the distance from the source. So I've got the height above sea level at each of my points that I've decided to measure this river. And then I've got the distance from the source. So I've got at the very source, that's, sorry, distance from the sea, I should say, sorry. No, distance from the source. I was right the first time. So point 1 is 1.2 kilometers from the source. Then it's 2 kilometers from the source, 4 kilometers, 7 kilometers, 11, 18, 31, 44, 52. And in class, I'll be asking the students why I decided not to do regular intervals for these measurements. Why? Because normally you would expect to have 2 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 6 kilometers, 8 kilometers. And it was to try and make it more realistic, because along a river, and quite often when doing physical geography field work, you can't be, you're not able to be as systematic as that in saying 2, 4, 6, 8, because of course you have access problems in actually getting to the river at that point. And so these are the points at which I was able to collect the data on this particular river. So what I would like to do is, when I finish giving these instructions, is to pause the video and to mark on your river's long profile onto here. And so you should be able to mark on. So for the first point here, we've got the source, 447 meters. So we go to the source, which is at point 0, and we go up to 447, which is about there, and we'll put across. And then number 1 is 360 meters. So now this was, number 1 was at 1.2 kilometers. So if that's 1 and that's 2, 1.2 will be about there. And it's 360 meters. So I'll go up to 360 meters. So it's going to be approximately there, and I'll put across. And I'll do that for each of these points. And then I will do a dot to dot, I suppose, rather than a line of best fit, to get my nice long profile of a river. What I would then like you to do is, looking at that, I would like you to just draw a sketch of what the cross profile will look like at each of the stages. Now, if you either rewind the video or on Google Classroom open up the PowerPoint that goes with this, again, you will see the general shape that you should be drawing in here. So we should have very steep V-shaped valleys and a narrow river. Here we should have less steep sides and a slightly wider river. And of course, in the lower course, you're going to pop on some levees. So press pause, complete this task. Okay, what I'd also like to do is to try and divide your river up now into where you think the 3 courses are. So at what point along here do you think the upper course starts and finishes? At what point does the middle course start and then finish and go into the lower course? It's not an exact science. There's no exact, this meters in height, it turns from this to this. It's different for every river. But it's at what point do you think there is a marked difference in going from steep to flatter, and then, so I suppose, completely flat. And so it's just to have an idea of where you would suggest the upper, middle and lower course might be of this river. Remember, this is not a definitive line marked along a river. It's something we have used as geographers in order to best understand how rivers behave, because they behave in 3 very different ways depending how far along their length they are. So that's probably what your graph ended up looking like. So that sort of shape, and if it did, that's fantastic. So you joined up the points hopefully and had a nice smooth curve. In fact, that's probably important to note actually. I'm not sure how well I explained that. Although we're doing a dot to dot, you're not going to kind of with a ruler do dot to dot to dot. You're going to do look at your graph paper and judge the curve and do a freehand one line. Okay, so you'll see information on the next slides as I go through them on each course of the river. Your first task, move myself up there so I can read. Your first task is to shade the area on your long profile that you think represents that particular course of the river. Now I asked you to do that in the last activity. Have a look at what I've done below and see if yours is similar to that. And if it's not, that's not a problem. You can make some adjustments on there now. But hopefully you can see why I decided to call that bit my upper course. Clearly a very steep area of land. Clearly this bit then starts to gradually reduces in height and gradient. And then here, possibly could have started it a little bit further along the lower course and see a consistent lower bit here. So the upper course, so you should have drawn a cross profile that looks something like that. And if you want to add some notes to your upper course, you might add the fact that it's a steep V-shaped valley. You might add the fact that the river erodes vertically downwards. You might add information that the river is narrow and shallow. You might add the information that it's a turbulent flow. I'm not going to bother those questions. We'll move on to the next one. So the middle course. Again, you should have your cross profile section looking something like this. The sort of information you might add to your middle course notes are the fact that it's a wider flat valley floor. It's a wider and deeper river. The river erodes both vertically and laterally. So in all courses of the river's eroding downwards, vertically and laterally outwards. What's important is in the upper course, vertical erosion dominates. In the middle course, both kind of operate at an equal amount, and in the lower course, the lateral erosion dominates. In the middle course, the river is wider and deeper, and it's a less turbulent flow. It's a gentler gradient. So these are all just notes you might want to add, just to remind you of the key characteristics of the middle course of a river. Oops, sorry, lower course of a river, that bottom part there, so you get the idea now. That's what your cross profile should be looking like, and this is some of the characteristics you might add if you want to add any notes to your lower course of your river. It's a very wide flat valley floor. The river is eroding more laterally. It's a very wide and deep river. It's the deepest part of the river. There's a large sediment load, so that means it's carrying a lot of sediment at this point. It's a smooth, fast, laminar flow and a very gentle gradient. This is an exam question which I'm going to ask students in class to answer if they finish in time in the lesson. It's similar to the exam question for homework. So if you can answer this, then absolutely your homework will be a doddle. And so it's describe how the shape of a river valley changes downstream. Now, just be important to note, I've asked how the shape of a river valley changes, not how the river channel changes, or not how the characteristics of a river change. It's asking you specifically about the river valley. Giving you some words here to help you. Do you want to talk about the gradient of the river valley, the shape of the river valley, the width of the river valley, about the emergence of floodplains in the river valley, about where perhaps vertical erosion and lateral erosion take place? There are 4 marks available for this, and I put a suggested structure there. I'll stop talking now, and you can pause this if need be to read that suggested structure and then attempt this. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson. Hopefully now you've got a much better idea of the river long profile, how it changes downstream, and what the cross profile of a river is. Wednesday's lesson will also be uploaded in video format, and that will look a little bit more along on cross profiles of the river before moving on to river processes.